just to introduce today's session, this is called Making Food Recovery Work. And the vision for this session is, as the title suggests, to explore and facilitate dialogue on strategies being developed, practiced, and improved on across the state to make food recovery real, sustainable, and viable in our large and rural states. We have four really exciting presenters today. Kind of how we're going to structure this is that I'll introduce each presenter before they speak, and then we'll have a period of Q&A right after each one as we move along. So our first presenter that I will move to is Gretchen Boyer. Gretchen, works for Farmhands Nourish, and she is the executive director of Farmhands Nourish and has been with them since 2004 and was the first paid employee. She is passionate about growing local food, eating good food, and making sure everyone in our community has access to it. So Gretchen, I will go ahead and pass it on to you for your presentation.
Thanks, Madison. As she said, I'm Gretchen Boyer. I run Farmhands Nourish the Flathead, soon to be Land to Hand Montana. We're rebranding. And I was on the board in 2004. I didn't become an employee till 2017. So I've been a part of the organization for a really long time. And we've had 4 tremendous years of growth since we actually had someone paid to do the work of our nonprofit. And one of our projects, we do a lot of food access work, and we run food access booths at the farmers markets in Columbia Falls, Whitefish, and Kalispell. And we also help with this double SNAP dollar program all throughout Northwest Montana. And so we're very immersed in farmers markets. And the Whitefish Farmers Market, we've been doing our food access programs at since 2009. So we have a very great relationship with the folks who run the market and are very entrenched in the operations. So 2 years ago, we proposed moving to a zero waste market. And the market's run by a nonprofit called the Heart of Whitefish, which is business owners all throughout the city. And their goal is really, economic vitality and beautification of downtown Whitefish. So the market is it ends up being actually one of their big funding mechanisms to do that, beyond this, pretty awesome farmers market that happens every week that's attended by thousands of people and a huge portion of tourists, our tourists at the market. So 2 years ago, we proposed to go to zero waste. The board agreed and actually really kind of handed the whole process over to Farmhands to make it happen. And they were willing to pay for it. So we knew quickly that the only way we could make this work is the only reason we could make it work is because we have a commercial composter in the Flathead Valley, Dirt Rich Compost. Owned by Alyssa LaChance, and she just does an incredible job. She focuses on composting food scraps. So we knew this would be a great fit. So we started with talking to all the vendors saying that everybody needed to move to all compostable products. And when we thought about what that meant, we thought of everything. And we said nothing, all the products that go out, we have a lot of food trucks at this market, have to be compostable, and you can only sell aluminum cans. So, because that was what we could recycle. And so at the first market, we had folks that came with tinfoil that they put within their compostable products. So they put like tinfoil at the bottom of their compostable boats because one of the products is we have a Thai food truck, and he's like, well, it's going to get messy. And we had a burrito company. They're like, well, what are we going to do? And so after that first market, we really worked with Dirt Rich to come up with products that would work, alternatives that could work for all of those folks. And our current model is that we set up cans throughout the market. We have big signs that say, compost only, talking about all the products. All the businesses have signs that say, our products are compostable. And we are then, me and 3 of my employees usually are garbage people every Tuesday for 3 hours. where we go around regularly and check on the bins and pull out the plastic that comes from random places downtown, because people bring stuff from, you know, other businesses into the market space. And we've been doing it for 2 years. We've diverted all the waste from the market, from the landfill to Alyssa. I would say our contamination is getting better each year. We're doing more and more education, and, you know, we feel really proud about what we've accomplished with just this one market. We've been working with the city of Whitefish to come up with a zero waste events plan, and helping other, you know, yearly events that happen. We're the only weekly event that happens downtown. But, you know, we have lots of great events that happen in our parks that, you know, could adopt this mode of operation. And it's really interesting. So, you know, we have 3 farmers markets, actually 4 farmers markets in the Valley, that also host food trucks. And a lot of the folks who are at our market, you know, go to other markets. And the first year, as I told you earlier, we're at all the markets. So we see the food trucks in their different venues. And the first year they only use compostable products at our market. This last year, they were using compostable products at all the markets, whether they were composting, whether the market was composting it or not, which we thought was a huge win. Because I think that first year, a few folks it was a little bit hard for them to wrap their brains around, but now it's their business model, which is pretty exciting for us. I think our biggest takeaways are that we would like to have a central location where folks threw away their compost, so we could do more active education. But the way the market's set up, it has some barriers that make that a little difficult. So we're trying to figure out those kinds of things as we move forward. Robin, should I add anything else? Robin's been helping me on this project pretty regularly.
Well, I have a ton of questions, but why don't we just leave it there for now? And I mean, I mean, you could answer this question is, you know, in your world, what's needed for your system to be sustainable long-term? Or really, what's the drain on sustainability for you?
Thank you. I do think, as I stated just now, the way that the market's set up and how far it's spread out makes it very staff intensive to monitor. And so we'd really like to come up with a plan where we had a central location where folks could bring their waste to. And, you know, inevitably there's always some landfill waste that's around, and it would allow folks to throw away, you know, legitimately throw away things that need to go in the landfill. And right now they end up like throwing it on the ground, or they throw it in the compost and I have to pull it out, all those pieces. And so that's, you know, that's something during the market season when it's super busy, you know, I with the help of my staff, it's every 10 minutes we're checking trash for 3 hours. So it's kind of that's not a very sustainable model. So I think that's the biggest takeaway we've had from what we've done in the last 2 years. I think someone put a question in the chat, but
Okay.
you want to it later.
Yeah, no, let's go ahead and go through. These are, let's go. I had said we'll do questions at the end, but I think that we have time, and I think it's relevant to just, you know, giving the better picture of your system. So Carl asked, do you have trash bins as well, or just compost and recycle it?
Well, we don't, because if we did, then people would, it would be too confusing, because people really struggle to read anything that's there. Then that's what we found. If we catch the person that's standing there and like looking and trying to figure out what to do, and we have time to just talk to them, it works out wonderfully. And if anybody takes time to read it, they take their trash somewhere else, which is great. There's trash cans on the other side of the street. So, but I think we would be pulling stuff out a lot more. That's why the central location is the most, I think, is the best way to do it. And I think that's how the Bozeman market does it. And that's what we would like to do in the future.
Great. And then one more question before we move on. Alex asked, is there a financial assistance for the food vendors who want to transition?
No. We
No.
talked to all the vendors. So, you know, our market starts in May. We talked to all the markets or the vendors in January and February. And we encouraged them all to charge more for their products. You know, all of them chose not to, which was interesting. And at end of year 2, they all are pretty excited about what they're doing. So, you know, it's that first year where they don't want people, you know, it's funny, most of our markets, people aren't going to even blink an eye if they charge 50 cents more per product. So that's kind of how we approached it with them. And that worked out okay.
Thank you. So I'm going to be, I'm the executive director of AIR, and I'm going to be moderating today's conversation. I insisted that we have this session at Expo because food recovery is just such a critical part of a food system, a functional, resilient, and sustainable local food system. And it's not necessarily the sexiest part of it in some people's eyes. However, this group of people, as you'll see, I asked them to come together because I think they've done some really creative approaches to food recovery in an urban setting within a large and rural state such as ours in Montana. And so I'm just going to go ahead and let I'm not sure the exact order. Madison knows the order. The next 3 folks continue, and you'll see that they have developed some really cool partnerships that try to get around this very issue of food recovery in a large rural state. And I asked Gretchen to speak from her perspective because Farmhands Nourish is a very well-established and mature food access organization with connections deep into our community, really all across the Flathead. And by necessity, they have had to step in and work on food recovery. So it's, you know, they have a really fabulous perspective on the value of food recovery from the food access and producer component. And I'll just ask you to think about that, Gretchen, as we go through the rest of them. And I'm sure you'll have more to say there. So I'll leave it to you, Madison, to introduce the next person.
Perfect. Thank you, Robin. Yeah, my apologies for not introducing you as moderator at the beginning. So be helping out throughout. So our next speaker is going to be Carl Johnson. Carl is the founder of Yes Compost, compost collection company in Montana, who says his company wriggled its way into being by filling a need in his community, a compost collection service that creates quality vermicompost. Their mission, build soil. Yes Compost strives to bring back the natural nutrient cycle within our community by redirecting all of our food waste away from the landfill and instead use them to replenish our soil and foster new plant growth. So with that, Carl, I will turn it over to you to share your slides.
All righty. Well, thank you. I will start with the screen share here. So yeah, thanks for the intro. That sounded really good, Madison. I like that. But yeah, so our company is, you know, what I call the last best place for food waste, and that's not just to you know, to play on the Montana little saying there. It's also because there's a lot of other places that are much better for food waste. So with if I can get my slide to go, here we go. So this is, can everybody see the slides? Is that okay, Madison? It's coming
yes, through. We can see
okay.
it.
So basically, this triangle here sort of describes food waste. And the top level is much bigger because that's actually a place where a lot more food waste is being produced versus down where we are in the purple with a compost facility. So The top level is talking about source reduction by, manage to not overproduce, supply chain stuff so that things are just in time, so you're not getting a lot of spoilage in your trucking and shelf life of edible foods. So that's a really big place where there's needs to be a whole lot of attention, not really our focus, but that's kind of the highest level. Below that is food for people. So obviously, the intent of a lot of the food that's grown in this country is to, and worldwide, is to feed humans. And we have an example with the Gallatin Valley Food Bank where we kind of work through this triangle. So maybe I'll just switch over to that and talk about it. So the food bank is great because, as grocery stores, which are kind of the first attempt to feed humans, if they have issues with spoilage or, stuff that just needs to be, they need room on the shelves for their new stuff, a lot of that material goes to the food bank. So it stays in that feed humans class. And then over at the food bank, if they have stuff that does spoil, they actually have a farmer that comes in who takes whatever she can for her animals. So that's kind of, the next best option as we're moving down this priority list. And then whatever's left after she's picked through it comes to Yes Compost. And we, take care of it in our aerobic composting facility. And hopefully, there's not a ton left after that. But kind of the tip of this triangle represents the last scenario, which is to actually bury it in a landfill, which many of you probably are very familiar with the fact that it's quite poisonous there, creates methane gas and toxic leachate. So we get air and water pollutants that otherwise are not created if we use a composting process with organic material. So that's why it's the last case, because we've got a lot of other things to do with that food that hopefully will consume it all through, supply chain management, and then just good grocery store ordering and supply chain, as well as the consumer doing their best to not overbuy and things like that. So we're working at the end of this food waste pyramid. So Robin asked to sort of go through a few of the challenges that we face. We actually are we're doing composting up the Big Sky Farmers Market. So I can echo a lot of the things that Gretchen has mentioned about the problems that we face there. But as a company, that's has a goal of reducing food waste and, being responsible with the leftovers that do occur. We have a few challenges to our business and to just daily operations. Number one that I list here is landfilling is cheap. In Montana, we do have a lot of land, and without the, really severe urban pressure of space, it allows us to have a landfill that is quite affordable in terms of putting stuff in there. So that's problematic because it means that people that want to participate with a service like ours that has a monthly fee, they have to, figure out how to make that work financially versus just, the cheapest option, which is buried all in the landfill. The other thing that we face is just operational costs are a huge part of actually managing food waste. The stuff is heavy. There's a lot of it. So we're just driving around a lot, which means, our box truck needs maintenance, our equipment needs maintenance. So it's a costly endeavor in a lot of ways, which is hard to prove or bring forward when you're talking with customers that want to participate but don't understand the economics of it, thinking that, oh, you're going to take my food waste, but then you're going to make compost and sell that compost and make a ton of money doing that. which is not really the case. The way our business is structured, we basically have three pieces that pay for themselves, or kind of two. The recovery, everything that is going around collecting material and bringing it back to our compost yard, that basically pays for itself. And the profit is very small. The actual active composting, where we're mixing piles, adding carbon to the food waste, managing the aeration, the water levels, that takes about 6 months of active management. And when we sell that compost, those sales dollars are really what's covering our cost as we manage that material. So it's just that economic equation is something that a lot of people don't really understand. And part of that is that the landfill is so cheap around here. So kind of echoing more with what Gretchen deals with is contamination. So you can see the few pictures on the bottom here. Because composting is new to a lot of people, we have to focus a ton on education. And even with what we do, which is mostly, trying to provide information to our participants, but then also doing outreach in schools and other places, businesses that have an office, compost collection. We try and educate the whole staff and get the word out. But we do see a lot of it. The bucket in the middle there that's about how much we pull out of the piles every single week. So we go through, we have 6 windrows, we turn the entire pile, and then whatever trash comes to the top, we pick off, and usually fills 1 or 2 buckets. And that's constant for 6 months of processing. So, things just keep popping to the surface and emerging. So it's, there's a lot of contamination. We do our best to pick it all out by hand, because that's really the reliable way, versus trying to use some sort of depackaging or screening equipment. And the reason we're willing to invest that amount of time is that we really think making extremely high quality compost is really what we should be doing. Yes, we should be managing all organics and keeping them out of the landfill, but creating really high quality compost is what's going to really bring this benefit into the agricultural sector, and start to have people realize that, all of this waste that's been thrown away can actually be really useful in the farm, to build your soil and get all of that microbiology back up and running. Right now, across the nation, most compost facilities are just managing yard waste and wood waste. And really the market for those products is just, it's kind of a mulch. They sell a lot to the DOT and other places as reclamation material to try and stimulate some plant growth. But we've had, there's a lot of plastic contamination and other things like that I believe are sort of adding to a pollution problem in a lot of ways. So we do our best to really, handpick everything out that we can, which is a lot of work, but we believe in it. So yeah, one of the we've been talking about, how to make this work in a big state. So one of the things that Matt will talk about with 406 Recycling is how we've formed a partnership where, because Helena did not have a food waste collection program, Matt decided with his recycling company he was going to start that up, but he needed a place to bring the material so that it could be composted. So we partnered up so that Matt, when he comes down to Belgrade and Logan landfill to collect e-waste, he brings down compostables and food waste from Helena so that we can process it at our facility with on an empty truck backhaul that's coming this way anyways. And then we're trying to work out where I'm going to be doing more e-waste collection up in Big Sky, because I'm up there doing food waste collection once a week, so that I can bring that back to Belgrade. And whenever Matt makes a trip, he can load up on the e-waste that I've collected on my routes, so that we're not running double trucks on both of these routes. one for e-waste, one for Yes Compost. We're trying to make those work together. And I'll let Lizzie talk about our Big Sky event, but we've also partnered with We Recycle Montana and Republic Services to offer public community recycling events as with 406 as well. So we do e-waste, glass, metal, yard waste, just as a single promoted event to help everybody kind of get their stuff cleaned out of the closets and yards, and also to highlight that these services do exist, so that people can start to participate, or more people can start to participate. And that's kind of what I've got prepared. I don't know if there were questions that came up.
Yes, sorry, we do have a couple questions that popped in. Maybe we'll just address those, and then we'll do another round after everyone's gone through. But 2 questions showed up. One from Mark saying, Carl, is that anaerobic digestion or aerobic digestion as priority over landfilling? I think you're referring to the diagram. The
triangle, yeah. Yeah, so that was talking about anaerobic digestion as like energy recovery, capturing methane generally to run, either produce electricity or heat. But aerobic digestion would also be in that category, certainly above landfilling, because there is a useful energy that can be derived from that material versus once it's put in the landfill, that's essentially not capturable. There are methane wells once a landfill has been capped that can recuperate some of that. But generally it's far less efficient versus having an anaerobic or aerobic digestion facility.
And excellent. And then Abby asked, how did you identify a good location for your composting operation?
Yeah, so that's actually, that was one of the challenges on there that I guess I didn't talk about. So it is problematic because you do need there's not only permitting requirements that are put out by the Department of Environmental Quality that have certain setbacks, proximity to live water, groundwater, all these things that are meant to, preserve are essentially the environment where your facility exists, do end up causing some challenges to finding a spot that really works well. My biggest challenge actually has been just being able to communicate with people that are landowners that may want to, engage in a longer term lease to host a facility like this. But when you are doing food waste composting at scale, there definitely are smells that are generated, particularly in the first sort of 6 to 8 weeks of processing the material, which, when the wind is just right, those smells can kind of concentrate and move for, half a mile and potentially bother people. So that's a really, that's a big issue that I've dealt with. We've already moved twice and we're moving a 3rd time, hopefully a 4th in the next year. So it's definitely a challenge. Right now, I think the DEQ does a good job to make it a simple process. So hopefully, with smaller scale facilities, the permitting part is easy. And if you're doing only a couple tons of food waste a week, you can do that generally on a pretty small footprint and without much nuisance smells or, other vectors or problems. So a kind of an ideal model is like a very distributed of this, where people are composting, in small batches close to where that food waste is produced. But there definitely are efficiencies to having a larger facility. So that's kind of where we sit. but we try and encourage people to do backyard composting, and actually help educate people to do so, so that that's an option, because we do believe in that. So I see another question about managing moisture. So yes, we do actually have to add quite a bit of water, because our piles get really hot and evaporate a lot of water. We cover the piles in the summer for the first couple months. After that, we generally don't, just because it's a lot of labor to put the cover on and off as we're managing the pile. But we in the midsummer, we're probably adding about 300 or 400 gallons of fresh water to the more finished compost, just to keep things right. And then the newest piles that are in the thermophilic stage, so really hot and cooking, we're adding somewhere around 600 to 800 gallons of water. And for that, we actually use gray water. So whenever we wash the bins and the buckets that we use for food waste collection between each service, so we collect all that water that we wash with, goes into a drain, and then we pump it into a tank, and then use that to hydrate any pile that's still in the thermophilic stage. Once it goes into the curing stage, we don't add gray water, just because we don't want to be introducing any fresh material that could introduce pathogens. But yeah, we use a lot of water, and there's definitely some technologies we're looking into that are going to reduce that water consumption. But it's a lot.
Okay, thank you so much, Carl. I'm sure we'll come back with more questions, but Madison, I'm going to turn it back over to you.
Perfect. Thank you, Robin. Yeah, and thank you again, Carl. That was a good segue into our next speaker, Matt Alsager, and correct me if I mispronounced your last name, from 406 Recycling. Matt has decades of combined experience running recycling operations and advocating for recycling in Montana. He founded 406 Recycling in 2018 with the vision of providing Montana businesses, organizations, government agencies, and households with secure, convenient, and local electronics recycling that ensured high environmental stewardship standards are met throughout the entire end of life recycling process. So with that, Matt, I will go ahead and turn it over to you if you want to share your slides or give another brief introduction.
Great. Well, thank you. It's Matt Alsager. The A is silent, and it's not the first time that was closer than many get. And I'm very pleased to be here today, and I really appreciate how informative these other presentations have been. And I'll just show some examples of what we do here at 406 Recycling and how it ties in with the partnership Carl spoke to. So just tell me if you can't see these slides, but this sort of shows the broad range of stuff we do at 406 Recycling with we employ folks with disabilities on electronics recycling, but like Carl talked about, there's just a lot of costs and challenges with this. So really, not just the mission of being green, but also utilizing that logistical capacity we have with box trucks and everything. It's just been a really great, exciting partnership for us working with Carl, and we basically set up these buckets for residents. And then here you can see one of our setups at a local event in Helena with the compost at a local beer festival where they had, often they'll have compostable cups now, which is great. But and one challenge there is always how you make sure it's the compostable cups and not the plastic cups. And I'll just show, and here's a picture of sort of how I got into working with Carl specifically was when COVID changed the restaurant supply chain. Places like Food Share had a lot more waste. So that was really when we started more frequently working together. And then we've been partnering with events and in the other ways as well. And in that slide on the upper right is just to show we do use biodiesel when we can. And this is just one example of the events we were working on with Big Sky the Big Sky area before. And really, if you look at this slide, the nice thing about events is outside the food court, you can make things visible. People get that. I think that's really the best marketing, is people just seeing the example and getting familiar with it. And just on the, and this is Red Ants Pants, which we've done for years. So.
Is that all food waste at Red Ants Pants?
Oh, no, no, that's just recycling. So yeah, so really I think the key aspect that has been exciting for me and is a lot of the challenges Carl has mentioned, I don't have to deal with, as far as the odor, the expertise. What we're able to do is backhaul. We have an empty truck going down to Gallatin County almost every week, which is right now it's a 26-foot box truck that we fill with electronics. So we're able to palletize all the buckets for dozens of households and then take business collection as well. For households, we've really just matched Carl's model. And what's really nice about what Carl's doing is being as green as possible. So we're able to partner with his program. So this is our 406 compost bucket. And, essentially it's hard to see, but we have the logo with Yes Compost. And so residents in Helena are able to get a bucket for their apartment, house, whatever it might be. And we're really focusing on that organic material that's not being covered by the more industrial facilities, and really getting that high-end organic worm casting stuff that you're going to lose if you have an industrial collection, even though it is more cost to, in our case, use a van, have people walk out and swap the bucket from people's households. We're trying to make it convenient for them, but we're also trying to minimize the footprint of the collection itself. So we're not having big bins not having a 45-gallon bin on the street when most of the year, and even in the summer, people aren't going to fill that with yard waste. So they can focus on the food waste. And then to address the needs some people have for yard waste, we've sort of modeled on what Yes Compost does. They provide some level of yard waste collection. We sort of just have folks contact us, and we either provide a compostable bag, a large grain sack, or even something as small as a little paper grocery bag, if that's what they have. And so I think really, for me, the exciting thing about those events, Carl mentioned most of the partnerships I would mention up at Big Sky. With events, we're able to control everything. So we're able to utilize that capacity we have with trucks, the experience we have, but then also you have a controlled environment. So even if it's very labor intensive for that day, you're getting people who have chosen to come to the event. You're able to handle that, provide that one-on-one interaction that makes sure they're educated so they do learn. And I really echo all the challenges of signage, getting people understand the various commodities. Labeling is a huge challenge. I think one of the biggest things we need to develop is somehow, as bad as that recycling chasing arrow thing can be, especially with plastics, just having clear compost labeling, because we get that now there's tons of cups and they're with eco-friendly businesses that they say recycling, compost, it's not ill-intentioned, but it's really unclear what they are, whether they're compostable, biodegradable, recyclable, and that's the challenge. We did start, Caro provided us some of those compost bins I showed in that slide. We started using those at our weekly music gathering in Helena, much like the Thursdays in Bozeman. Helena, it's Alive at 5 on Wednesdays. And there were actually 2 restaurants, Rockstar Barbecue, which would be, and Greekish, which would be the last 2 I would have guessed would have been all compostable, but they had really switched to all compostable items with the exception of sauce packets, which I think Eco Montana in the Belgrade area really has the products that are addressing that. And I think it's just as simple that cups are pretty well developed. With you do sauce packets, it's just one more step. And I think COVID added some challenges as well, as far as all that extra packaging, the sanitation, and you don't want stuff getting squished. And really as far as the logistics go within the city of Helena, we've just gotten through a process with the city where we will be a contractor formally. Hopefully there's an email in my box now about that, but we'll be able to formally provide a service on behalf of the city to their single family homes. But we've also been we have multiple customers who are apartments, and we also do an exchange program. So folks from the wildland urban interface can pull their organics outside of the waste stream. And it's really as simple as a cabinet at the Good Samaritan thrift store in Helena. We just have clean buckets on the top shelves, and they just have a combination and swap things out and put their initials on it. So that's been a nice addition, so folks can bring stuff in from out of town. And
that's great.
yeah, so yeah, and it's really been exciting for us. We've been just slowly growing it, but I think we're to where if we'd like to get to around 200 customers or so residential in a couple dozen businesses. And at that point, we'd probably be to where we'd want to explore a more local facility. But in the meantime, we're doing, not only do we have synergy with our electronics recycling, but when we do an event like Red Ants Pants, sometimes we'll have something where we're hauling items from cans from a music festival to We Recycle Montana near Belgrade. Then we're hauling compost back from one area, or food waste. And then or after we empty that, we get the electronics, but we brought the compost up on the way. So it's neat for us. Every month we're getting more containers where they're designed to be where we can fill all the compost buckets, put the buckets in, transfer them to Carl, and then those empty containers will then be filled with giant televisions or whatever electronics are needed to get hauled away from Gallatin County. And yeah, those are really the basics, and I'd be happy to answer any questions now or later.
Well, I had a question. Again, I thought I was going to do this later, but I'll do it now. It's really for Carl, Matt, and Gretchen. And, you know, I don't know, I'm back and forth about Lizzie. But anyways, here's the question is just kind of how far away is what's the distance beyond which it does not make sense to ship food waste to be composted someplace else? Like what's that distance boundary? Which we may actually get some data on now.
Yeah, I can take a stab at that. Obviously, if you're using a backhaul, it could be quite far and still make sense. But the way we actually have a calculation that says X number of miles, you have to be hauling X number of pounds in order for it to make sense carbon footprint wise. This came up with a contract that we were bidding on or trying to price out of Yellowstone Park. So in the winter months, we go down to Mammoth Hot Springs and pick up food waste from two of the concessionaires that have facilities there. But it was almost 2 hours of driving each way. I knew I could do it in a pickup truck with a trailer, so it was going to be efficient fuel wise, but still, I didn't want to be in the end just creating more pollution versus the amount of food waste we're going to haul. But so we get about 1,000 pounds a week out of that one. And unfortunately, I don't remember the exact calculation of, food waste poundage required per mile, but that one did make sense carbon footprint wise. So it's an equation. I would say that, certainly if you're traveling a couple 100 miles a day, you're going to need to be receiving a couple tons of material. And then, even then, you know, the question is, why isn't there a more localized solution for that material? And hopefully, you know, like I was talking about with a distributed model, we're going to have more and more of these facilities that do meet the need on a more, you know, localized level.
Yeah, and I would just add something I think that's really exciting about this sort of smaller scale food waste collection getting into the kitchen is you are providing a very basic collection options for folks who are really serious about their environmental footprint. So looking at how do we make it easy for those folks, having in our case they put a bucket up at the front door. In the vehicles going around, the more and more customers we have, the more efficient that collection mechanism is going to be. And for our part, it works out well for us because we really do need weight on our trucks, especially in the winter if there's wind. But it's a way we're sort of cobbling together all that capacity. So if Carl's able to get electronics, so I'm not sending someone 30 miles into Bozeman, and then we just have that transfer point. It is a nice efficiency, but as we get to key decision points in the business, we are always going to be evaluating how we can be as green as possible. But I think a big challenge we have to be mindful of is food waste collection is here, and is it going to be sort of the model we're talking about, which is very organic and really green minded as much as it is business minded, versus what we have, I think in most places is you have a trash can that's just too big, and that really skews the model because it does make the landfill artificially cheap. And in Helena, our model basically taxpayers subsidize, residents pay more for trash than commercial. And so I think that question gets into how do we make sure the collection's as efficient as possible too, I guess would be the other factor in addition to what Carl said.
Can I jump in?
Sure.
Thanks. Matt, it occurs to me, I do composting workshops at the Waukesha Community Garden. It's about an acre community garden in Helena. We work with quite a bit of materials. We never really have enough food waste, or that's not what we're emphasizing, but what if we were able to work with you on, you know, when we want to do a composting workshop, to bring over a load of food waste, you know, say 1,000 pounds or maybe a truckload to incorporate in our initial building of compost. Is that something you could do?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's really a great feature of the partnership we have with Yes Compost and Carl is that if there's a week where you can take half or all of the food waste, that's going to be something we can do, because a lot of it's getting that infrastructure in place in a way that's as green as possible. And that just makes me think of one thing too, is we have customers that they compost on their own. They just sign up in the winter. That's been sort of neat. And that's, or there's just folks there's so many folks in the urban area that can't compost out on their own. So that's the exchange site model. But yeah, absolutely, Jim. I mean, the vision is to be looking for partnerships like that for land and everything else. And I really don't know what the scale we would be at to where we would have our own local facility, but I know I definitely would like to see the model where the food waste is being kept separate from all the plastics and all the lower grade compost. Or it's great if there's industrial compost rather than landfilling, but I think we really want this more nutrient rich model, which you really emphasize with all the work you do with food share. And I think as far as I know, everything you've done, Jim.
That's great. I think I'd like to I'll bring in Lizzie at this point so she can be part of the next part of the conversation, and we'll come back to the questions after that. So Madison.
Perfect. Thank you, Robin. And thank you, Matt, again for sharing. Our final speaker for today's session is Lizzie Payton. Lizzie is the Community Engagement Director for the Big Sky Sustainability Network organization, also known as SNOW. She has called Big Sky home for almost 2 decades, working as a personal chef, whitewater raft guide, and in the nonprofit sector. She is committed to sustainable living practices and environmental health at all levels, and has studied soil health and regenerative agriculture through the Savory Institute and University of Colorado Boulder by working on a biodynamic farming collective in Tanzania. So with that, I will turn it over to Lizzie.
Thank you, Madison. Hello to everyone, and for the night, thank you for the nice introduction. I am going to introduce you guys to what SNOW does generally, and then how we pair a lot and collaborate with Carl and Matt, because they are a very integral part in our community and kind of the steps to make us a more sustainable community. So SNOW was founded about 2 years ago. It was founded right before COVID, so it kind of had a rocky start as far as a nonprofit goes. It was a bit of a working group of about 10 people, and they kind of created some subcommittees. With COVID coming in, everything kind of waned, and then they restarted up this year. I was brought on this summer, so I was brought on in late July and have been working with them ever since. As the community engagement director, it is my job to basically message, educate, and engage the community in what their more sustainable practices can be and how they can contribute to our collective efforts as in decreasing our carbon footprint as a community. So just a couple things that we do, and we help facilitate a lot of like what Carl and Matt talk about as challenges. Our goal going forward is to help mitigate those challenges through education in the community. We work on everything from like development, which is obviously a huge portion of what's happening in Big Sky right now. The development is pretty unprecedented. Everything from that level down to smaller everyday items and across the board. So that includes recycling and composting. Something we are currently working on right now is basically applying for a couple different grants that will make a system of universal compostables and composting the second you turn at the Conoco into Big Sky. So all the challenges that Gretchen, Matt, and Carl all discussed about contamination, in theory, and we're in the very nascent stages of this, so this is the hope, and it will take time, and we recognize that, is that in theory, we won't have any contamination issues at our events that are zero waste, because most of the community will be on compostables in a composting system. We do have a really big challenge with recycling right now because we don't have any curbside recycling. There is one recycling center in Big Sky available to the public. So it is a deterrent for some people, which is a challenge, but hopefully we will be getting curbside recycling back soon. So right now with the applying for the compostables, what we're doing is basically funding the difference. We will hopefully, pardon me, we haven't received the grant, we've applied for the grant. We will hopefully fund the difference between what it costs to purchase a regular takeaway container versus what the companies charge to for a compostable container. So for the businesses themselves, the restaurants and the vendors, it will be the same price across the board. Our approach is over a couple of years to essentially create a space where we are funding the kickstart of the project, but eventually it allows the businesses to own the cost and pass it on to the customers, as funding for that won't be, it could be sustainable, but we're encouraging everybody to pass it on to the customers, as we, as you all know, in Big Sky are a pretty tourist heavy destination. So that is something we're working on right now. And then in addition to that, Amy Trad, who is my counterpart at the resort, and I are going through the entire Cisco catalog of SKUs and cross-referencing everything on bpiworld.org to make sure items are actually compostable. So when Cisco can't bring an item that a restaurant ordered, they'll often bring a different item. And we're going to have kind of a no-go list, so an okay list for Cisco to bring. So if they can't bring item A, item B will still be compostable. So whether it's an employee who has learned and been educated in composting the right thing and everything, they can still compost that item. So it's not a backup item like Matt was referencing that's like actually plastic and not PLA. So that's something that has been a good project the last few weeks, and hopefully Amy and I will be wrapping up in the middle of December. And it's a pretty extensive spreadsheet on all the SKUs available for takeaway from Cisco. So that's a pretty big project we've been working on. And then also to what everybody said about education and signage. I came on late in the summer, so wasn't able to be at the events that Carl and Matt were privy to, but we are helping organize a couple different events throughout the winter in Big Sky. And I have gotten volunteers to come to those, to what I would call compost, recycle, babysit. And kind of what Robin or what Gretchen had talked about before, and standing and babysitting the spaces where people are dumping their items. So that's kind of what we do. We encourage everybody in our community to join our collective efforts in becoming a steward. That's from businesses to organizations to individuals. We have both what would be considered a challenge and an opportunity in Big Sky, that we are not incorporated. So there actually is no central source of government, which is why we exist as a nonprofit. We're filling a role that would otherwise generally be filled by a mayoral office, I believe. So it is a challenge. There's a lot of messaging and lanes that gets confusing, but at the end of the day, I think most often it can be an opportunity for us to be creative about how we go about things, which is why we're able to get funding potentially for some of these projects, including an event that Carl alluded to earlier, which is a biannual recycling day. So we have the recycling facility in Big Sky, but we don't recycle any glass, which people are very concerned about. And then also the electronics that Matt recycles, and kind of scrap metal. So this October 1st, we had a recycling day where we recycled 1,330 pounds of glass, 900 pounds of scrap metal. And I don't know, and Matt may know this number and may not, but how much electronics, but I will tell you it was an impressive amount of printers. I've never seen so many printers in my life. It was just, that's what everybody was getting rid of. So we have a lot of fun with it, and we are really about messaging to the community, engaging the community. And we are also working on a climate action plan for the entire Big Sky area that is based on greenhouse gas emissions reports that we ran for 2018 and 2019. So that's currently being drafted and will be hopefully finished drafting by the end of March approximately. We're engaging different community stakeholders and coming in, and that are specialists in 5 different areas that we've identified as ways we can really drastically cut emissions. So we don't just unilaterally push it out onto the community. We have community buy-in from the drafting. So that's kind of what we're doing and what we're about. But a really big thing that's important, as we are a tourist destination, is consumption reduction. It's very hard messaging for a community like this with so many tourists coming in. And coming in having different knowledge sets on what they can recycle at home and what they can recycle here. So a lot of signage, a lot of messaging, and we're working hard on that going forward. And we're very hopeful that it can make a tangible difference to both Carl and Matt, and for the carbon footprint of our community. So that's kind of it.
That's great. Thank you. Am I on mute? Yes. So excellent. Thank you very much, Lizzie. Can you remind me, I think you told me when we spoke previously this number, but what is the percentage of participation by the businesses in Big Sky at this point in terms of the food scraps?
Oh, in terms of food scraps. So for restaurants and I think I have the number here, sorry. For restaurants and the, and the grocery stores, I think there is 16 different restaurants and grocery stores on board right now with composting. Carl might be able to correct me. And then there's all 3 of the private clubs and the resort are all on board. So those have multiple food sources within them as well. So, but we are trying to make it universal. And I think I want to say there's a total of 27 restaurants and grocery stores, food vendors in Big Sky as it lies. So we're not super far off, but Carl may have better numbers there than I.
No, that was right. Those are the good numbers. There's definitely, there's people that want to participate too, but there's, concerns with financial concerns mostly. So I think that's a huge benefit with snow, to be that, the bridge, that closes the gap for small restaurants that are just getting started up, people that are creating food waste, but don't necessarily have the funding to pay extra, which is what it is right now, to have their food waste composted versus have one bill and everything goes in the trash. So that's again, kind of one of these synergies where organizations like Snow is going to be that kind of hopefully the last little bit that people need to really just get started.
And
Yeah.
something that Carl was so kind to appease us on this last week is I've paired with all 3 clubs and the resort in anticipation of the winter season starting and staff orientations. And we created a recycling video and a composting video as to how best to do that. So it's universal across all back of house operations in all 3 clubs in the resort. So hopefully that really decreases contamination for them. I pointed out to Carl that it's really important that he say that he specifically handpicks everything out, because I was like, that will get like at least 20% of people into trying harder. So.
And just for clarity, is it, does Yes Compost backhaul glass as well? Or who's doing the glass recycling? That, did I understand correctly that somebody's picking up your glass?
So right now we do not do any backhaul because our backhaul is actually going to Big Sky. So we're fully loaded when we come back to Bozeman, that's where the glass is actually recycled. So with these events that Lizzie was talking about, all that material does get hauled by Four Corner or We Recycle Montana. But we're definitely, thinking about, how to do that efficiently, because the reason that glass isn't recycled is because it's a shipping, it's a trucking issue, and it just doesn't make sense carbon footprint wise. So having either a local solution where we can crush it and use it for construction material, or finding out how, to do it on a backhaul that all the way down to Salt Lake somehow, which is where it gets recycled. But right now there's not that going between, between Big Sky and Bozeman.
Okay, that was my bad. I forgot about.
Nope, it's okay. And to also clarify, Robin, there is no glass recycling in Big Sky except on the days on the 2 recycling events that we're doing each year. But there is, the Yellowstone Club does do its own glass recycling that is backhauled to Salt Lake because they have so many trucks going in with haul that they go back empty otherwise. And so I know that they do recycled glass down to Salt Lake independently. So.
And the trucks that are going in are coming in for what purpose?
Development and construction.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
Mhm.
That's information. Yeah, as Gretchen can attest, in the Flathead Valley, we don't have a real functional glass recycling. We have a very, very small one, but it really does not manage our glass. And yeah.
It's glass recycling in Montana is a huge challenge. And Carl, Matt, and I are all on a waste reduction committee together. And after reaching out, I have gone out to all the businesses, or many of the businesses in Big Sky that are restaurants and bars. And part of my job is to have a dialogue. And the number 1 request I receive is glass recycling by a long shot.
Mhm,
So.
mhm. Yeah.
I just wanted to say it's so awesome that Snow has Lizzie now, and those events really are exciting, and that glass is a whole other issue which I've been very involved with in the past. And there's the backhauling. It's great to hear about that backhaul example, because that might be something that could be expanded to the community. And I don't have the numbers in front of me, Lizzie, and I owe those to you, but I think it was about 4,000 pounds we hauled up that day of electronics. And
I'm not surprised. I was like, you won by far.
yeah, and it was, and what we're really proud of that, it's the data destruction and the environmental components of that too. So not only are those resources going back into the economy, but a lot of screens have mercury in them. Those tubes will be pulled out, and the glass will be recycled. The mercury gets pulled out, and we yeah, it's really neat with all the other partnerships we have on how, we're almost at 100% of that stuff really does get recycled. It's pretty neat.
That's so awesome. I mean, and that's like super exciting because that was so much stuff. I was amazed. So, and I know what I do know about the cost for the Yellowstone Club as far as glass recycling goes. I believe it's $25,000 to $30,000 a year that they're paying for it. So it's not an insignificant bill, which is, I think, what of a lot of the aversion is otherwise, and funding for that would be exceptionally challenging. Yeah.
Wait, I lost you on that. Could you repeat that? I didn't understand.
Yep. The Yellowstone Club's backhaul glass program costs them from $25,000 to $30,000 per year.
Understood. Okay. I had a question, Gretchen. What do you know? Do we have a process in the Flathead area for doing these types of collaborative recycling days?
So I think the landfill hosts some electronic recycling days, and at the fairgrounds, I think occasionally a couple times a year, there's some of those kinds of events. We have Pacific Steel here. They take all scrap metal and Kalispell, so they actually do a really good job there. And then, as Robin kind of stated, we have a Flathead Recon here does glass recycling, and they partner with nonprofits to have glass recycling days. And so the way it works, and we've done a few of them, because when we think about our work, our mission is to build a strong community food system that fosters socially just ways of accessing food. But the strong community food system recovery is a big piece of that. And, and being aware of our footprint, having a fundraiser where we're recycling glass feels like a real great win-win for us. So we usually host 2 a year at Flathead Recon, and our last one, I think in 3 hours, we recycled like almost 2,000 pounds of glass. So they're really a popular event, and it's cool because we charge, 50 cents a pound or something like that. And then we give 20% to the Flathead Recon, and we get the rest, which is really exciting. So we made a couple $1,000s in our last event, which was awesome. And it felt really good. And I think, that's where the other piece of composting comes in for us. It's that piece of the system that's important.
Can I ask a quick question, Gretchen? So you're charging everybody who's dropping glass for that recycling day. So you're weighing it upon entry and then charging them accordingly.
Exactly.
What is your messaging system as far as communication that you find most effective for getting people involved in those days?
So we do a big poster. We do posters actually throughout the whole, usually Kalispell, Columbia Falls, and Whitefish we focus on in the Flathead Valley. And then we do a lot of messaging through social media. And, it's a known place, and he's been doing it in that system for a while. So people are always like, when is the next recycling coming? And, so the people in our network, they hoard their glass for that day.
Got it.
Okay, twice a year. And then we because we are a food access organization, we have a really nice digital scale.
Yeah.
And that has been like the thing. I mean, it was a game changer for us, because we used to like hook it on a, it was not efficient, and it was fine, but for the amount of people that came, people would be standing around for a while we weighed their glass. So when we figured out that efficiency, the last one we did, Dave, who runs Flathead Recon, was like, that is the most efficient glass event we have ever had. And we sort
It's
it by color.
motivating to see how much people are bringing in, I bet.
Yeah, well, and it's cool because he's actually crushing it right there. So
Right.
it's all right happening.
Cool.
And so we sort it by color. You know, everybody's wearing earplugs because it's loud, and you know, people are watching it happen, and then he sells the crushed product. So it's kind of a neat piece where you get to see it all happening, you know, the whole process. But anyway.
Cool. Thank you for sharing that, because I just want to make ours as big as it can be. And we're talking about next year, we're going to do kind of sandwich the summer season and do like a grill out and hopefully get a free band for the first day to like get everybody there to hang out, kind of kick off the summer, and do one to bookend the last end of the summer kind of a thing, just as like getting more gravity there.
Yeah. And I think, yeah, as I said, our events are actually really popular, and people are really excited. I mean, everybody wants glass. It feels like this commodity that we shouldn't be throwing in the landfill. It seems crazy.
Yeah, exactly.
I drive
If I
my,
could just,
go ahead, Matt.
oh yeah, just hopping in on that. In Helena, we used to have an event called Trash for Trees, and we could get, I think we had events where we had 30 or 40,000 pounds of glass. It was a long-standing event, and people, it seemed reasonable. A lot of people could hold their glass for events that were once or twice or 3 times a year. So it's really important, I think, too, as we're trying to get everyone towards zero waste, to just, you want people to sort of have the morale that they can do this. And glass really is pretty easy to recycle locally as aggregate, or and there is value to it. And as we read of more and more, sand is a resource in the world that there's a shortage of in many places. So really, but just from a infrastructure perspective, by recycling glass, if you're doing glass, food waste, and the other readily available recycling, you have very, very little trash left. And I think that's why glass always stands out so much, is it's the heavy one and it's left, but that's also, it's a neat product. It doesn't have all the chemicals that plastic has, or cans where they're lined with plastic. It's infinitely recyclable, and there's just a lot of options there. But yeah, and I think these events are going to get really big, Lizzie, and I think glass will be probably more than e-waste within a year.
Oh, that's good to know. Good to
I don't know, those
so there's a
printers
couple-
get you far, Matt.
I just want to hit these questions. I have some that I forgot to catch up with earlier. So, but first, Alex Kaminsky has a really good question, which is that, is there a state map visual somewhere that lists the compost and recycling stations and events? She lives in Dixon, Charlotte, interested in partnership opportunities in other regions to extend these efforts. I think that's a really great idea. You know, I happen to know about a map, which abundant Montana, but I don't actually think that we capture recycling stations.
That would be a great addition to the.
I agree.
Map.
Yeah. Okay. This is a good conversation. Thank you, Alex. Carl had asked earlier if you have a penalty for vendors that don't use the compostables.
We don't let them be at the market. And if they, so we've had a couple interesting issues where, like, we had one food truck who they had like hand cut fries that they served with their burgers, and they ran out of fries, so they started giving out chip bags. And I started going, I'm like, where did these chip bags come from? And they were great. They like came out, and I'm like, you need to bring a staff out to help me pull all this chip bags out of the recycling or the compost. So we have a couple snafus that happen. We had a coffee truck that like ran out of compostable lids, so they just put their regular lids on, and I had to say, you guys can't do that. Like, if you run out, like, tell me what's going on. We can have a conversation. I'm here to help you, but you can't just start putting in plastic. So we kind of deal with all those on a single basis, but we don't, you know, when they apply to be a part of our event, We have a couple check boxes. I mean, we explain that it's a zero waste event, that they're required to have these products. We give them lots of resources. Heidi from Eco Montana is one of the resources. You know, Cisco has a lot of great stuff. There's Smart Food Service, which is a new like food service store that's in Kalispell that actually has lots of compostable products. And so we really help with those resources. And then they have to sign that they understand that they're not allowed to have anything but compostable products at our event. And we've also created kind of like a guide for the city for other zero waste events, and how the process that we went through and kind of the mistakes we made at the beginning, like not saying you couldn't have aluminum foil. We now it says that clearly aluminum foil is not allowed. And so all those guides have made it be really great. I mean, straws, all our cups, everything. You know, last year, I think the chip bag was the only issue I had with the food vendors. The one other issue is we have a balloon animal person that does it, and balloon animals break all the time. They don't really usually last very long. So we really have had to work with that vendor on messaging to the customers that they have, like when your balloon breaks, if it breaks, you need to bring it back to here. You know, she has a little garbage can, and she has to tell that to every single person. Or I told her if I kept finding stuff, I was going to start finding her. As soon as she started that messaging, we found way less, which was really great. But we have told all the vendors that if they don't follow this and we end up finding things and they don't help us do what we need to do, that we will charge them, because Alyssa from Dirt Rich, she's been so wonderful. But, you know, I said, if you have to work too hard to get out lots of contaminants, you need to charge us extra, and we're going to pass that on to our clients if we know that's what they're doing. So
Gretchen, just so you know, you've gotten a couple of requests to see your guide, and I guess that's the same thing as the list of what's allowed and not allowed. And if you, anyways, that came actually from Carl and Elizabeth, so I think you actually have their emails, but we could also make that available to the others who are registered.
Yeah, if you have the list, Robin, I
so
can send it to you. You help me make it. So.
Oh, I don't even remember.
Yeah, maybe you paid Andrea to do it.
Oh, there you go. There you go. And so what do you recommend to vendors with burritos in place of foil?
So wax paper. So Alyssa gave us a list of 3 different varieties of wax paper. We sent that out to all of them, and it's now what they do, and it works out great. And I get burritos most weeks at the market because that's like my favorite food, and they're awesome. So
I think we have to stop this conversation. Much as it's just, you know, I could go on for quite some time. I think the last thing I want to ask is maybe from everybody, if you had one, what is the best, most effective messaging that you have found for getting your vendors to participate and to get your, you know, the tourists, the consumer to participate? And I'm just wondering if, yeah, we could just do a very quick 30-second hit, and then we'll close out with that. Carl, I'll start with you.
So the one that I'll bring up is just regarding compostable plastics and to-go wares and things like that, all these new things that people are coming across. And the thing that I think has hopefully worked the best is the phrase guilty until proven innocent. So that if people aren't positive that their item is compostable, they have access to me so that I can confirm before it goes into the compost pile. Because really prevention is the answer to this. So yeah, guilty until proven innocent.
Okay, that's great. Matt, what do you have to say?
Well, I think a lot of it's still just one-on-one and people seeing other people do it. So I mean, that's where I really like events and we sort of started after things were in COVID lockdown or slower, but it seems to be a lot of what we're getting is just word of mouth and people seeing this as a good green option. And I did have one other different thought for a conclusion, if that's a possibility too.
Okay. Sure. Quickly, Lizzie, what's your best messaging?
So I'm working on attainable sustainables because it means it's something you can do all the time, every day. So it's not this outlandish goal that you're never going to actually attain. Little ways is another thing I say that's a little more accessible. What are little ways you can help and make a change? And then as far as actual like communications, direct email has been the most efficacious and most responsive.
Perfect. Gretchen, anything you want to add?
I think, every time I actually get to talk to, and it's, as I said, a lot of tourists at our market, they're just so excited that they're a part of zero waste. Like there's nobody out there that's like, oh, I'm so mad, I'd rather this go to the landfill. So it's pretty cool to hear just the positive feedback, but it's the constant education that I think is the most important piece to do.
Awesome. Okay, Matt, close us out.
Okay, well, just wonderful. And this is just great to be here, but I think just a really exciting thing in all these efforts is they're just very organic. They're very sort of genuine. I think they're starting with advocates, so it's just really exciting to see these work, because I think these are, I think something we have to be watching for is to not have things happen like they did with recycling, where it did get just too industrial and we had all the quality control issues as things scaled up. So I guess that was sort of my looming concern, and that's why we're focused on having the smaller industrial facilities initially. Thank you.
Yeah, that's a good point. Okay, well, I'm going to pass it back to Madison. Thank you everybody for participating. It's been a very fruitful and engaging conversation.